Look closely at the intricate carvings on ancient temple walls, the faded brushstrokes on millennia-old silk scrolls there. Lurking in the shadows of myth and history, you'll find them. Monstrous forms twisted into impossible shapes, creatures born not of nature but of pure cosmic disruption. These are not mere beasts from folktales. These are manifestations of humanity's deepest fears given form, embodiments of chaos that once threatened to unravel the very fabric of existence. For thousands of years, Chinese mythology has whispered of these four primordial forces of corruption. The Four Perils, entities so terrifying that their very names were spoken with caution, their legends woven into the cultural consciousness as warnings against disorder, arrogance, and moral decay. What if I told you that these ancient stories aren't just fantastical tales, but reflections of how an entire civilization grappled with the concept of balance? The Four Perils represent more than mythological monsters. They symbolize the eternal struggle between order and chaos, virtue and corruption, harmony and discord. These creatures emerged from the darkest corners of the human imagination to embody everything that could undermine a stable society: deceit, ignorance, destruction, and greed. Their stories have echoed through dynasties, appearing in ancient texts, influencing philosophical thought, and serving as cultural touchstones that remind us how fragile civilization can be when faced with its own inner demons. Today, we're embarking on a journey deep into the heart of Chinese mythology to uncover the secrets of these legendary beings. We'll explore their origins in some of China's oldest texts, understand why they were considered so dangerous that even gods and heroes feared them, and discover how these ancient narratives continue to resonate in our modern world. This isn't just about mythology, it's about understanding how our ancestors made sense of chaos and why these stories still matter today. So settle in, open your mind to the wonders of ancient belief systems, and prepare to meet the four most feared creatures in Chinese mythology, the embodiments of primordial chaos known as the Four Perils. To truly grasp the power these beings held in the ancient Chinese imagination, we must travel back to their first recorded appearances, primarily within one of the most fascinating and bizarre texts to survive from antiquity, the classic of mountains and seas. This isn't a straightforward narrative, but rather a sprawling, encyclopedic compilation of geography, flora, fauna, and mythology, describing a world that is both wondrous and terrifying. It is within its pages that we find the bedrock of their legends. The text doesn't present the Four Perils as characters in a story with a beginning, middle, and end. Instead, they are listed almost as facts of the cosmos, distant, dangerous entities whose very existence in a certain region was enough to mark it as a place of profound disorder. This method of presentation lends them an air of terrifying reality. They are treated not as fables but as documented hazards in a world still being mapped and understood. But their significance extends far beyond a catalogue of monsters. The conception of the Four Perils is deeply intertwined with the core philosophical frameworks that shaped Chinese civilization for millennia, namely Confucianism and Taoism. Both philosophies, in their own ways, championed the idea of harmony, or Chinese letter He. For Confucians, this harmony was social and moral, achieved through proper conduct, respect for hierarchy, and virtuous leadership. Daoists saw harmony as a natural, cosmic balance, the effortless flow of the Tao. The Four Perils became the ultimate antithesis to this ideal. They were not merely physical threats but metaphysical ones. Each one embodied a specific type of corruption that could shatter this delicate balance. They represented the chaos that erupts when reverence for tradition is lost, when compassion is abandoned, when ignorance prevails, and when destructive ambition goes unchecked. They were the negative space that defined the positive image of a harmonious society. This is why their defeat was never just a simple hero's tale. It was a cosmological necessity. In the mythology, we often find that these creatures are subdued or driven away by legendary sage kings or cultural heroes like the Yellow Emperor or Yu the Great. These figures were paragons of virtue and order. Their victory over a peril wasn't about personal glory, it was a symbolic act of creating civilization itself. By conquering these embodiments of chaos, they were literally carving out a space where humanity could thrive under the mandate of heaven, establishing a proper relationship between the celestial realm, the earthly world, and humankind. The subjugation of a peril was in essence the imposition of order onto chaos, a fundamental theme in many creation myths across the world. The stories served as a powerful reminder that harmony is not a default state but a fragile achievement that requires constant vigilance and moral fortitude to maintain. Unlike Western traditions that often frame the battle between good and evil as a stark, cosmic war between light and dark, Chinese philosophy offers a more nuanced and perhaps more profound perspective. Here, what we might call evil is rarely an external, mustache-twirling villain. Instead, it is understood as a state of profound imbalance, a deviation from the harmonious flow of the Tao or the proper moral order known as the Way. Think of it not as a force of pure darkness, but as a dangerous rip current in the vast ocean of existence. It doesn't seek to destroy the ocean. It simply pulls everything out of its natural, life-sustaining rhythm. This concept is central to understanding why the Four Perils are so terrifying. They are not just monsters, they are living, breathing manifestations of this dysfunction, each one corrupting a specific pillar that holds up a stable universe. This worldview is deeply rooted in the fundamental concept of yin and yang. You've probably seen the symbol, the swirling black and white teardrops containing a seed of their opposite. This isn't just a design, it represents the dynamic, interdependent balance of all things in the cosmos, light and dark, action and rest, masculine and feminine. Neither side is inherently good or evil, both are necessary. Evil or calamity arises when this balance is lost, when one aspect wildly predominates, or when the natural, complementary relationship between forces is severed. The Four Perils are the embodiment of this severance. They are beings of pure, unchecked excess, so extreme in their singular corrosive nature that they cannot integrate into the whole. They are a cancer on the body of the cosmos, growing out of control and disrupting the healthy function of everything around them. To grasp their specific roles, we can see each peril as corrupting a fundamental virtue essential for a harmonious society, whether human or cosmic. For instance, one might represent the utter perversion of trust and honesty, thriving on deceit and betrayal to shatter the social contracts that allow communities to function. Another could embody destructive ignorance, not merely a lack of knowledge but an active, aggressive rejection of wisdom and tradition, leading to folly and catastrophic decision-making. A third might personify uncontrolled avarice or gluttony, a hunger so insatiable it consumes everything in its path, leaving only lack and desolation in its wake. The fourth could be pure, mindless violence, not strategic force, but chaotic, indiscriminate destruction that erodes the very foundations of order. Their danger lies in their infectious nature. A peril doesn't just attack you physically, its very presence warps the environment and corrupts the hearts of those nearby. It fosters the very imbalance it represents. A realm plagued by the peril of deceit would become a nest of paranoia and treachery, where no one could trust their neighbor. A land under the shadow of the peril of ignorance would see its people reject wise counsel in favor of foolish whims, leading to societal collapse. They don't need to conquer through armies. They conquer by turning a civilization's own virtues into vices, by making imbalance feel like the new normal. This is why ancient texts treat their existence with such grave seriousness. Finding one was not like discovering a dangerous animal. It was like diagnosing a deadly societal illness at its source, a corruption that, if left unchecked, would spread until the mandate of heaven itself was withdrawn, leaving the world to drown in its own chaos. And so we arrive at the first and perhaps most philosophically profound of these dreaded beings, Hundun, the embodiment of primordial chaos. Its very name translates to chaos or muddle, and it is the most ancient and abstract of the perils, representing a state of existence that predates the universe itself. Unlike the others, Hundun isn't a monster of violence or deceit. Its terror is far more fundamental. It is the chaos from which all order must be painfully carved, the formless void that exists before the defining lines of creation are drawn. Imagine the cosmos not as a dark emptiness, but as a swirling, undifferentiated soup of potential where there is no light or dark, no up or down, no beginning or end. This is the realm of Hundun. It is pure, unstructured potential which sounds almost positive, but to an ordered mind and a structured society, this utter lack of distinction is the ultimate nightmare. Ancient texts and artistic depictions struggle to give form to something that, by its very nature, has no form. Often, Hundun is visualized as a shapeless, bear-like creature, a rolling mass of fur without any defining features. Most terrifyingly, it is frequently described as having no face, no eyes to see the world, no ears to hear it, no mouth to taste or speak, and no nostrils to breathe. This isn't just a grotesque detail, it's the entire point. These 7 apertures, the eyes, ears, nostrils, and mouth, are what connect a being to the ordered world, allowing it to perceive, interpret, and interact with reality in a structured way. Hundun, lacking these, exists in a perpetual state of undifferentiated sensation, a constant, muffled roar of everything and nothing all at once. It doesn't experience the world. It is the world in its raw, unprocessed, and utterly incomprehensible state. This makes Hundun uniquely dangerous. It doesn't choose to cause chaos. Chaos is its very essence. Its mere presence slowly erodes the boundaries that keep reality coherent. In one of the most famous legends about Hundun, found in the Qiongqi, we see a tragicomic tale that perfectly illustrates this. The rulers of the North and South Seas, Shu and Hu, would often visit their friend, the ruler of the Central Realm, who was named Hundun. Hundun was a wonderfully generous host, yet Shu and Hu were troubled that their friend could not experience the pleasures of the world as they did. The sight of a beautiful painting, the sound of music, the taste of fine food, because he lacked the 7 apertures. So, with the very best of intentions, they decided to perform a kindness. Each day, they carved 1 hole into Hundun's body. After 7 days, having carved eyes, ears, nostrils, and a mouth, they succeeded. But instead of granting him senses, they had imposed order upon his chaos, and in doing so, they killed him. The story is a profound philosophical warning. The forceful imposition of order, even with good intentions, can destroy a natural state. Hundun was chaos, and to fix him was to end his existence. This is why Hundun is the foundational peril. It represents the cosmic danger of the unformed, the threat of reverting back to a state where nothing makes sense. For a civilization built on intricate social order, respect for hierarchy, and clear moral codes, the idea of dissolving back into a featureless muddle was the ultimate existential fear. Hundun wasn't an enemy to be fought with swords, but a condition to be vigilantly guarded against through the constant, conscious application of culture, virtue, and ritual. It was the void that always threatened to seep back in through the cracks of civilization, a reminder that the order we take for granted is a hard-won achievement against the innate pull of the primordial chaos from which we all emerge. This poignant tale from the Qiongqi isn't just a simple fable. It serves as one of the most elegant and devastating critiques of forced order ever conceived. The emperors of the North and South Seas, named Shu and Hu, were not villains. They were guests who had enjoyed the boundless hospitality of their friend, the ruler of the Central Realm, Hundun. They saw a being who was kind and generous, yet tragically cut off from the sensory world they cherished the sight of a sunset, the sound of laughter, the flavor of a feast. Their desire to help him experience these joys was, from their perspective, a profound act of gratitude and compassion. They sought to uplift their friend, to include him fully in the structured reality they knew and loved. This makes their actions so terribly relatable. How often do we try to fix something we don't understand, convinced that our way of being is superior? Their method was deliberate and systematic, one aperture per day for 7 days. With each drilled hole, they believed they were gifting Hundun a new connection to the ordered universe. An eye for sight, an ear for sound, and so on. They were not torturers, they were benefactors, applying what they saw as a benevolent and logical upgrade. But in their structured, ordered view of existence, they failed to comprehend the fundamental nature of their host. Hundun was not an incomplete ordered being, he was chaos itself. His existence was not a deprivation of senses, but a state of pure, undifferentiated potential where all sensations and possibilities existed at once in a harmonious, unstructured whole. The 7 apertures didn't connect him to a richer world. They imposed a brutal filter on his reality, forcing the infinite, swirling soup of his consciousness into the narrow, categorized streams of sight, sound, and smell. He did not gain the world, he lost his entire self. The result, Hundun's death, is the ultimate paradox. The very act of imposing order, even with the purest of intentions, destroyed the very thing it sought to improve. This story brilliantly flips the conventional mythological narrative on its head. In most cultures, the hero slays the monster of chaos to create order and save the world. Here, the would-be heroes, in their attempt to eradicate chaos, commit a catastrophic act of violence against a natural state of being. Their victory is a profound loss. The ordered but flawed existence they brought into being is our own world, a reality of separation, distinction, and individual perception, but also a world of loneliness, misunderstanding, and the inherent conflict that comes from our limited, sensory-based experience. We live in the world that killed Hundun, a world defined by the very boundaries that severed us from the primordial unity he represented. This parable resonates deeply with Daoist philosophy, which prizes naturalness and effortless action, or Wu-Wei. It warns against the human arrogance of believing we can improve upon the inherent, often messy, perfection of the natural state of things. It suggests that our relentless drive to organize, categorize, and control can itself be a destructive force, a kind of well-meaning brutality that suffocates spontaneity and wonder. Hundun's story asks us a difficult question. In our quest for a perfectly ordered life, what essential, chaotic beauty are we accidentally drilling out of existence? The myth doesn't argue for a return to mindless chaos, but for a respectful acknowledgement that some forms of disorder are not problems to be solved. They are the necessary, fertile ground from which all true and organic order must spontaneously grow. Hundun's story is far more than a curious myth. It's a profound philosophical critique wrapped in the guise of a cautionary tale. This being symbolizes a danger that is subtle yet immense, not the threat of wild, uncontrolled chaos, but the peril that comes from a certain kind of order, the kind that is rigid, artificial, and imposed without true understanding. In trying to improve Hundun by giving him the 7 apertures, Shu, and who represent the very human impulse to control, refine, and civilize the natural world according to our own limited design. Their actions mirror humanity's endless effort to force the unstructured into structure, to name the unnameable, and to map the unmappable. The tragedy is that in their attempt to include Hundun in their world, they utterly destroyed his, demonstrating how the drive to homogenize experience can erase unique and essential states of being. This resonates powerfully with the core Daoist principle of Wu-Wei, often translated as non-action or effortless action. Wu-Wei is not about laziness or passivity. It's about acting in perfect harmony with the natural flow of the Tao, the underlying principle of the universe. It is the skill of a master carpenter who works with the grain of the wood, not against it, or a seasoned sailor who trims their sails to the wind rather than trying to command it. Hundun was the embodiment of the Tao in its pure, uncarved state, a being of perfect, effortless existence. Shu, and whose drilling was the opposite of Wu Wei. It was forceful, intentional action based on their assumption of what was best. Their intervention, though well-meaning, was a violent disruption of the natural order, a tragic example of how striving to do good without deep wisdom can lead to catastrophic unintended consequences. The myth, therefore, serves as a stark warning against the pitfalls of over-refinement and hyper-civilization. Ancient Chinese philosophers often looked back to a mythical golden age of simple, rustic virtue, and they viewed the increasing complexity of society, with its elaborate rituals, strict hierarchies, and intellectual abstractions as a potential source of alienation from our true nature. Hundun's fate is a metaphor for what happens when we over-cultivate ourselves. We risk drilling away our innate spontaneity, intuition, and connection to the simple, unprocessed truth of existence. We create a world of sophisticated senses, but we lose the capacity for raw, holistic experience. We gain the ability to see a painting, but we might lose the ability to simply be part of the canvas. In this light, Hundun transforms from a monster to be feared into a symbol of a lost paradise, a state of primordial innocence and unity that we can neither return to nor successfully replicate. Its death represents the irreversible price of consciousness and civilization. The moment we became aware of ourselves as separate from the world, we were cast out of the garden of undifferentiated being. We live in the world that came after, a world defined by the distinctions and categories that make knowledge and society possible, but also one fraught with the conflict, desire, and dissatisfaction that arise from those very distinctions. The haunting question the myth leaves us with is not how to defeat chaos, but how to live in our ordered world without losing touch with the humble, accepting, and effortless spirit that Hundun represented. It is a call to remember that true harmony isn't achieved by forcing everything into our own image, but by learning to appreciate and protect the beautiful, necessary chaos that exists both around us and within. If Hundun represents the cosmic terror of the formless void, then its counterpart, Taowu, brings that chaos crashing down to earth in a much more personal and terrifyingly relatable form. Imagine a creature forged from pure, belligerent ignorance, a being that doesn't merely lack knowledge but actively, violently rejects it. This is the essence of our second peril. Ancient texts describe Taowu as a monstrous hybrid, a savage, tiger-like body radiating brute strength, armed with the fierce tusks of a wild boar, but standing on the unsettlingly familiar feet of a human. This chilling combination of animal ferocity and human-like posture makes it a far more intimate nightmare than the abstract formlessness of Hundun. It didn't lurk in some primordial soup. It was said to dwell in the remote western mountains, a physical terror that could, in theory, be encountered by any unfortunate traveler who ventured too far from the civilized world. But its true danger was never its claws or tusks. Taowu's most powerful weapon was its metaphysical nature as the incarnation of stubborn ignorance. In Chinese, its name Chinese letter Taowu carries connotations of a stubborn, block-headed fool, someone who is impossible to teach or reason with. This peril doesn't just represent a simple lack of information. It embodies a willful, aggressive refusal to learn, to adapt, or to consider any perspective other than its own. It is the personification of closed-mindedness elevated to a world-ending threat. In a civilization that placed immense value on scholarship, historical wisdom, and the respectful study of ancient sages, there could be no greater anathema than a creature that literally fed on the rejection of these very principles. This concept of ignorance as an active, corrosive force is deeply embedded in Chinese philosophical thought. Confucius himself spoke extensively about the importance of learning and the danger of being stubbornly set in one's ways. For him, the ideal person was the junzi, or gentleman, who was endlessly curious, reflective, and devoted to self-improvement through study. Taowu is the absolute inversion of the Junzi. It is the ultimate anti-scholar, a creature that would rather destroy a library than read a single scroll, that would attack a teacher for the crime of offering knowledge. Its presence creates a bubble of anti-wisdom, a zone where good counsel is ignored, where lessons from the past are discarded, and where every mistake is doomed to be repeated with even greater fervor. We can see the devastating effects of a Taowu-like influence not just in myth, but in the pages of history itself. The ancient text Zhuozhuan actually uses the name Taowu to describe a notoriously wicked and unteachable prince from the Chu state, known for his brutality and his utter contempt for advice or admonishment. This historical connection is crucial. It bridges the gap between a mythological monster and a very real human failing. The myth warns that when a leader, or even an entire society, becomes infected with this kind of willful ignorance, the consequences are catastrophic. Decisions are made based on arrogance instead of strategy, on impulse instead of experience. The state becomes like the beast itself, powerful and fearsome, but ultimately stumbling blindly, lashing out at allies and enemies alike, and marching stubbornly toward its own inevitable collapse. Taowu teaches us that ignorance is not a passive state of emptiness. It is an active commitment to folly, and that commitment can be more destructive than any army. We can almost picture the scene on those treacherous western mountain paths, a scholar, laden with bamboo scrolls of poetry and philosophy, making his way to a distant court to offer his counsel. The air grows cold and the birds fall silent. Then, from the shadows of the crags, it emerges, not with a strategic ambush, but with a mindless, roaring charge. Taowu would target such travelers not for their riches, but for the very knowledge they carried. Its attacks were a violent, symbolic rejection of the wisdom contained within those scrolls, a brutal attempt to silence the voices of reason and history. The creature seemed driven by an instinctual, pathological hatred for anything that represented learnedness or civilized discourse, making the pursuit of knowledge itself a deadly endeavor. This behavior transforms Taowu from a simple monster into a powerful narrative device. Its choice of victims turns every journey of enlightenment into a potential hero's quest, where the simple act of carrying an idea from one place to another requires immense courage. The myth suggests that ignorance isn't just an absence. It's a predatory force that actively seeks to dismantle the networks of learning that bind a civilization together. By attacking scholars, Taowu was attempting to sever the vital connections between teachers and students, between past wisdom and present application, ensuring that folly would reign supreme by isolating every pocket of knowledge and crushing it. Naturally, a force this destructive could not be allowed to roam unchecked. Its defeat became a necessary mission for the paragons of order, most notably the legendary Yellow Emperor Qiongqi, a figure revered as a cultural hero who bestowed upon humanity the essentials of civilization, from writing and medicine to architecture and law. His confrontation with Taowu was far more than a physical battle. It was an ideological war. The Yellow Emperor, embodying the Confucian ideal of the sage king whose authority is rooted in wisdom and virtue, represented everything the beast despised. He didn't approach the fight merely as a warrior, but as a strategist and a thinker, using cunning and knowledge to overcome brute, ignorant force. The stories imply that to defeat Taowu, one could not simply meet its violence with greater violence. That would be playing by its rules. Instead, the solution involved outthinking the creature, trapping it through strategy and an understanding of its own simplistic, predictable nature. Some tales suggest the emperor used misdirection and clever terrain, turning the beast's own reckless charging against it until it was subdued or driven into a prison of its own making, perhaps a deep pit or a remote valley from which it could never escape. Its defeat was a monumental victory for the forces of enlightenment, symbolizing the triumph of reasoned strategy over mindless aggression, of accumulated wisdom over stubborn ignorance. This narrative arc, where a beast embodying a societal flaw is defeated by a hero embodying its opposite virtue, is a cornerstone of mythology because it provides a foundational story for a culture's values. The victory over Taowu wasn't just about making the road safe for travel. It was a cosmic affirmation of a core Chinese cultural principle, that the pursuit of knowledge and the respect for wisdom are the bedrock of a stable and harmonious society. The myth declares that willful ignorance, no matter how powerful or frightening, can and must be conquered by those who value learning. It serves as an eternal reminder that the path to a better future is paved not with clenched fists but with open scrolls. The terrifying legacy of Taowu extends far beyond its mythological role as a savage beast. It evolved into one of the most potent and enduring metaphors in all of Chinese literature and political discourse. This transformation from a literal monster into a symbolic one reveals just how deeply the fear of willful ignorance was woven into the cultural fabric. Ancient historians and philosophers didn't just write about Taowu to tell a thrilling monster story. They invoked its name as a stark warning, a linguistic shorthand for a specific kind of catastrophic failure of character, particularly in those who held power. To be called a Taowu was to be accused of the highest order of foolishness, a stubborn, arrogant refusal to engage with reality or accept counsel, a state of being that inevitably led to ruin. This metaphorical use is powerfully illustrated in the Zhuozhuan, one of the earliest and most important historical texts from ancient China. The chronicle uses the name Taowu not to describe a mythical creature, but to label a real historical figure, a prince of the ancient state of Chu known for his extreme cruelty and most notably his complete and utter unreachability. He was a ruler who surrounded himself with sycophants, who dismissed wise ministers, and who treated any criticism or advice as a personal insult to be punished, not as valuable information to be considered. The historians saw in this man's behavior the same essence as the beast from the Western mountains, a powerful entity that was utterly unteachable, lashing out blindly at the very people trying to save it from itself. By naming him Taowu, the Zhuozhuan made a profound philosophical statement. They were asserting that such willful ignorance in a leader was not a simple character flaw, but a monstrous perversion of the natural order of governance. This idea was central to the Confucian model of rulership, which envisioned a virtuous cycle between a wise sovereign and his loyal, honest ministers. The ideal ruler was a junzi, a gentleman who cultivated knowledge, practiced self-reflection, and actively sought out good advice to govern effectively. The minister's duty was to offer that advice even when it was critical or difficult to hear. This system required a fundamental humility from the leader, an acknowledgement that they did not possess all knowledge and needed the wisdom of others. Taowu represented the absolute breakdown of this system. A ruler who acted like Taowu would only listen to flatterers, would make decisions based on whim instead of precedent, and would see education as a threat rather than a tool. The inevitable result, as history showed again and again, was rebellion, collapse, and the withdrawal of the mandate of heaven. The myth served as a constant reminder that an unteachable king was a doomed king. The symbol of Taowu thus became a crucial part of the intellectual's toolkit for centuries. A scholar official risking his neck to criticize a misguided emperor could invoke the specter of Taowu without directly naming his sovereign, using the mythological allegory to deliver a brutally honest message about the path they were on. It was a way of saying, your actions are not just unwise, they are archetypally foolish. You are aligning yourself with the primordial forces of chaos and ignorance, and history will remember you as such. This gave the metaphor a powerful moral and rhetorical force, equating poor leadership with a cosmic failure of virtue. Even in our modern era, far removed from the courts of ancient kings, the lesson of Taowu resonates with unsettling clarity. We can see its shadow in the rise of anti-intellectual movements that glorify instinct over evidence. in leaders who dismiss expert consensus as elitist conspiracy, and in the cultural devaluation of nuanced knowledge in favor of simplistic, emotionally satisfying narratives. Taowu is the embodiment of the tweet that replaces a peer-reviewed study, the soundbite that overshadows a complex historical context, the charismatic figure who demands loyalty to a person over fidelity to the truth. The myth tells us that when a society stops valuing learnedness and critical thought, it doesn't just become less informed, it becomes vulnerable to a much older, more predatory force. It invites the beast in from the mountains, not to devour our bodies, but to consume our collective wisdom, leaving us stumbling blindly into a future we are no longer equipped to understand. While Taowu represented the violence of the mind, a rejection of all that nourishes the intellect, our next peril embodies a corruption of the body, a hunger so profound it seeks to consume the very world around it. Meet Taotie, the glutton, arguably the most visually iconic and culturally pervasive of the Four Perils. If you've ever seen photographs of ancient Chinese bronze vessels from the Shang and Zhou dynasties, you have almost certainly laid eyes on this monster. Its visage is unforgettable, a disembodied, often symmetrical head dominated by a gaping, cavernous maw with fierce, bulging eyes and formidable horns or fangs. It is a face of pure, ravenous appetite stripped of a body, as if the need to consume has obliterated everything else that it once was. This grotesque image was cast into the very metal of sacred ritual cauldrons and wine goblets, items used in the most solemn ceremonies to communicate with ancestral spirits. Its presence there was not merely decorative, it was a profound and constant moral warning, a symbolic guard against excess burned into the heart of Chinese ritual life. This choice to place a monster of greed on objects of such spiritual importance is a breathtaking paradox, but one that reveals the incredible philosophical depth of these ancient cultures. The Ding cauldron was far more than a cooking pot. It was a symbol of political power and social order. Legends say that the great Yu, founder of the Xia dynasty, cast 9 mighty bronze dings to represent the 9 provinces of his unified realm. To possess these dings was to hold the mandate of heaven itself. These vessels were used to prepare sacred offerings of meat and wine for the ancestors and gods, the very act that sustained the cosmic relationship between heaven, earth, and humanity. It was a ritual of community, sharing, and reverence, and staring out from the sides of these vessels was the Taotie, its monstrous face serving as a stark, silent sermon on the dangers of perverting this sacred act of offering into one of selfish gluttony. The message was chillingly clear, even in the midst of the most holy ceremony, surrounded by the evidence of your power and piety. You must never forget the corrupting potential of your own desires. The Taotie was a memento mori for the soul, a reminder that the line between a respectful offering to the gods and a gluttonous feast for oneself could be vanishingly thin. A ruler partaking of the ritual food was meant to see that monstrous face and examine his own heart. Was he consuming this meal as part of his sacred duty to maintain harmony, or was he indulging a personal hunger for power and luxury? The Taotie taught that unrestrained appetite, whether for food, wealth, or dominance, could reduce a king to a monster, a mere head with a mouth, defined only by what it could next devour, utterly blind to the needs of the state it was meant to nourish. The nature of its greed is what makes the Taotie so uniquely terrifying. Its most common depiction is that of a head without a body. This is not a simple artistic style, it is the entire point of the creature. The Taotie's hunger is so all-consuming that it has literally eaten its own body. It is a self-cannibalizing paradox, a being that destroys itself in its desperate attempt to sustain itself. It is forever hungry because its consumption provides no nourishment, only an escalation of empty desire. This transforms the Taotie from a simple monster into a powerful allegory for addictive and destructive behavior. It represents any pursuit that promises fulfillment but only delivers a deeper void, whether it is the lust for wealth that isolates a person from their community, the pursuit of power that erodes the virtue required to wield it justly, or the overindulgence in pleasure that ultimately destroys the capacity for joy. This concept of self-destructive desire is echoed in one of the most famous Taotie-related stories from the ancient text Qiongqi. It tells of a man from the Zhou dynasty who, overcome by greed, actually tried to steal the ritual meat from a sacred cauldron. As he reached in, the story goes, the Taotie mask on the vessel came to life, and the monster's head swallowed the thief's own head whole as punishment for his sacrilege. This gruesome tale is more than a simple ghost story. It is a perfect metaphor for how vice consumes the sinner. The man wasn't attacked by an external monster. His own greedy action triggered his downfall. He was, in effect, eaten by his own gluttony, which is the ultimate fate of anyone who gives themselves over to the path of the Taotie. His greed literally separated his head from his body, reducing him to the same monstrous state as the Peril he sought to rob. Beyond the ritual bronzes, the legend of the Taotie evolved, weaving itself into later folklore with a fascinating and terrifying twist. In these stories, the Taotie is often described less as a decorative motif and more as a living, breathing creature of the wilds, though its defining characteristic remains its insatiable and omnivorous hunger. These narratives depict it as a beast that will devour anything and everything in its path of plants, animals, people, even the very earth itself. It is a force of pure consumption, leaving only barren desolation in its wake. This version of the Taotie serves as a powerful allegory for the unsustainable exploitation of nature, a primal warning against stripping the land of its resources without thought for the future. But the most haunting detail in these later tales is the supposed fate of the Taotie itself. After it has consumed everything else in its environment, the stories say, the creature's all-consuming hunger turns inevitably inward. With nothing left to eat, it begins to devour its own body. This grisly conclusion completes the creature's symbolic journey. It is the ultimate end of unchecked gluttony, complete self-destruction. The Taotie does not simply die, it actively consumes itself into nothingness. This provides a devastatingly clear moral lesson. Greed is not a path to prosperity. It is a psychological and spiritual trap that annihilates the self. The person who lives only to acquire and consume will eventually find that their acquisitions bring no satisfaction, and in their relentless pursuit of more, they will have consumed their own humanity, leaving behind only a hollow, hungry shell. The Taotie, therefore, stands as one of mythology's most potent and unsettling mirrors, forcing us to confront the monstrous potential of our own appetites. This terrifying evolution of the Taotie from a symbolic face on a ritual vessel to a creature that devours itself raises a fascinating question. Did this monster of myth actually begin its life as a man? Some ancient texts suggest that the answer might be yes, pointing to a possible historical origin that makes its symbolic warning even more potent. The Zhuo Zhuan and other sources reference a figure from the legendary era of the Yellow Emperor, a man who was so notoriously greedy, corrupt, and gluttonous that his name became synonymous with insatiable appetite. This man, they say, was exiled to the wild frontiers for his crimes against the community, his actions so monstrous that he was no longer considered human. Over centuries of storytelling, his personal failing was magnified from an individual's vice into a cosmic archetype. His name, Taotie, was transferred from the man to the mythological beast he had come to represent. This process of myth-making is profound. It takes a very real human weakness and externalizes it, transforming a psychological flaw into a tangible monster that can be confronted, feared, and ultimately defeated in narrative. It serves as a declaration that traits like gluttony and greed are not just bad habits. They are forces that can dehumanize you, turning a person into a proverb, and then a proverb into a perpetual warning. This blurring of the lines between history and myth is central to understanding how ancient Chinese culture processed moral lessons. The story doesn't need to be factually true to be culturally true. By claiming that the Taotie was once a man, the narrative creates a direct, terrifying link between the audience and the monster. It declares that the potential for such transformation lurks within everyone. You could, through unchecked indulgence, become the very thing staring back at you from the bronze ritual vessel. This concept is reinforced in a chilling tale from the classic of Mountains and Seas, which describes the Taotie not as an abstract symbol, but as a living creature inhabiting the remote mountains of Taowu. It is depicted as a goat-bodied beast with a human face, but its eyes are located not on its head but under its arms. This bizarre anatomy is a brilliant piece of mythological shorthand. Eyes under the arms suggest a being that cannot see the world clearly. Its vision is obscured by its own limbs, symbolic of how greed blinds a person to everything except the object of their desire. It stumbles through the world, guided only by its appetites, unable to perceive the consequences of its consumption or the needs of anyone else. The most iconic and haunting iteration of the Taotie myth is the story of its ultimate fate, the tale of its self-cannibalization. As the legend goes, the Taotie's hunger was so absolute and so limitless that it would devour everything in its vicinity: livestock, crops, people, and even the very soil. It was a force of pure, undirected consumption, a black hole of appetite that left only a void in its wake. But eventually, it would encounter a landscape it had completely stripped bare. With no external sources of food left, its own ravenous hunger, which could never be satiated, would turn inward. The beast would then begin to eat its own body. It would consume its own legs, its own torso, until finally only its head remained. And then, in a final, grotesque act, the head would attempt to consume itself, leaving nothing behind. This is not just a story about a monster meeting a strange end. It is one of the most powerful allegories for self-destructive behavior ever conceived. The myth of the self-eating Taotie is a perfect metaphor for the cycle of addiction and any compulsive behavior that promises fulfillment but only delivers emptiness. The initial act of consumption, whether of food, wealth, or power, provides a fleeting thrill, but it never truly nourishes. It only intensifies the hunger, demanding more and more. The pursuit eventually consumes all of the person's time, resources, and relationships, just as the Taotie consumes the entire landscape. Finally, isolated and with nothing left to take from the outside world, the hunger turns on the self. It consumes one's health, one's sanity, and one's very identity. The person is destroyed by the very thing they believed would sustain them. The Taotie's story is a warning that an appetite without wisdom or limit is ultimately suicidal. It teaches that true fulfillment never comes from taking more, but from understanding what is enough. This ancient myth, etched in bronze and whispered in stories, remains a startlingly relevant lesson about the monsters we risk becoming when we confuse wanting with needing. The decision by Shang and Zhou dynasty artisans to place the horrifying visage of the Taotie at the very center of their most sacred ritual objects is one of the most compelling paradoxes in all of art history. We must remember that these bronzes were not mere decorations or status symbols. They were the very instruments of state power and spiritual communication. The great Ding cauldrons and Zhou wine vessels were used in ceremonies to offer food and drink to ancestral spirits and deities, a critical act that maintained the cosmic harmony between heaven and earth. This was a context of utmost reverence, order, and piety, and yet, staring out from the surface of these objects was a monster of pure, uncontrolled appetite. This was a deliberate, sophisticated choice, and scholars have debated its meaning for centuries, offering several compelling theories that reveal the deep psychological and philosophical wisdom of these ancient cultures. One prominent theory suggests the Taotie's presence was apotropaic, that is, it was meant to ward off the very evil it represented. In this view, the monster's image acted as a sort of spiritual scarecrow. By depicting the embodiment of gluttony on the vessel, the artisans were symbolically trapping it there, containing its chaotic energy within the rigid, ordered form of the cast bronze. The ritual vessel, through its sacred function and precise craftsmanship, thus became a prison for chaos. Every time the vessel was used correctly in a respectful ceremony, it reinforced the power of order over disorder, demonstrating that the community's rituals could keep the primal threat of insatiable desire safely bounded and under control. The monster was put to work, its terrifying image serving as a guardian that protected the ritual's sanctity from any actual corruption. A second, and perhaps more nuanced, interpretation is that the Taotie served as a constant, unavoidable memento mori for the elite participants in the ritual. Imagine a king or a nobleman lifting a dew vessel filled with sacred wine to his lips. As he did so, his eyes would meet the glaring, gaping face of the Taotie. In that intimate moment, the artifact became a mirror. The message was a sobering one. Even you, O mighty ruler, are not immune to this corruption. The act of offering could easily slip into the act of indulging. The sacred meat meant for the ancestors could tempt you toward gluttony. The wine for the gods could lead you to drunkenness. The Taotie was a silent sermon, a reminder that the power which allowed them to preside over these ceremonies also carried the potential for profound abuse. It was a warning against allowing the trappings of power to inflame the very desires that would ultimately destroy that power from within. This connects to a third theory, that the image represented the taming and ritualization of humanity's baser instincts. The ceremonies themselves, with their strict protocols and formalized actions, were a way of channeling powerful, primitive urges, like the desire for food, drink, and social dominance, into constructive, community-affirming practices. The raw hunger of the Taotie was not erased, it was redirected. The communal feast, sanctioned by the spirits and governed by ritual, transformed animalistic consumption into an act that strengthened social bonds and cosmic order. The monster on the bronze thus symbolized the dangerous, raw material of human nature that had to be, and could be refined through culture and ritual into something that served harmony rather than shattered it. The artistic execution of the Taotie mask supports these complex interpretations. They are rarely portrayed as full creatures, but are almost always presented as a confronting pair of monsters, split down the center and composed into a single, symmetrical, and perfectly balanced face. This split animal motif is crucial. It shows that the artisans were not just depicting a monster, they were intellectually deconstructing it and reorganizing it according to the principles of order and balance. The chaotic force of greed was being analyzed, taken apart, and reassembled into a formal, rational, and controlled artistic composition. This act of artistic restructuring mirrors the philosophical goal, taking the chaotic potential of human desire and restructuring it through ritual into a force that supports rather than undermines a stable civilization. The Taotie, in the end, is not just a warning about evil out there in the world. It is a profound lesson about the capacity for evil within ourselves and the constant, conscious effort required to keep it in check. Emerging from the shadowy realms where malice takes form is the fourth and perhaps most sinister of these ancient evils, Qiongqi, the devious manipulator. Imagine a creature that is the living antithesis of justice, a perversion of the natural order that actively works to corrupt society from within. Where Taotie represents self-destructive greed and Taowu embodies violent ignorance, Qiongqi operates with a far more intelligent and calculating cruelty. Ancient texts describe this peril as a monstrous, winged tiger, a form that combines the primal ferocity of a predator with the unnerving ability to descend from above, symbolizing its capacity to strike at society from any angle. Its most chilling attribute, however, is not its fearsome appearance but its twisted ethos. This is a creature that actively hunts and devours good, honest, and virtuous people, while simultaneously rewarding and encouraging criminals, liars, and flatterers. This deliberate inversion of moral order makes Qiongqi uniquely terrifying. It doesn't just cause chaos through mindless destruction, it engineers chaos through precise, targeted corruption of human morality. Its modus operandi is to seek out individuals known for their integrity and devour them, literally consuming the very pillars that hold a community together. At the same time, it would seek out the worst elements of society: petty thieves, violent criminals, and smooth-tongued deceivers, and present them with wild beasts it had slain as gifts, encouraging them to continue and even expand their wicked deeds. In the classic of Mountains and Seas, it is said to dwell far to the north, but its true habitat is the moral weakness in the human heart, which it finds and exploits with horrifying efficiency. Qiongqi represents the archetype of the malicious instigator, the force that doesn't just thrive in a broken system but actively works to break it. It is the embodiment of the cruel whisper that turns a minor grievance into a feud, the anonymous rumor that destroys a reputation, or the powerful figure who promotes incompetence and sycophancy while sidelining talent and honesty. Its goal is to sever the bonds of trust and reciprocity that allow any society to function, creating an environment where deceit is rewarded, virtue is punished, and paranoia becomes the default state of existence. In a civilization built on Confucian ideals of righteous conduct and benevolent leadership, the presence of a force like Qiongqi was the ultimate societal nightmare. The psychological terror of Qiongqi lies in its perversion of fundamental human expectations. We are wired to believe that good deeds should be rewarded and bad deeds should face consequences. This belief is the bedrock of social contracts and legal systems. Qiongqi shatters this foundation. By punishing the good and rewarding the evil, it creates a terrifying world where the moral compass spins wildly, where there is no logical connection between action and outcome. This breeds despair among the virtuous, who see no reason to maintain their integrity, and emboldens the wicked, who are given a supernatural stamp of approval. The creature doesn't need to conquer a kingdom. It simply needs to convince everyone within it that decency is a weakness and treachery is a strength, and the kingdom will conquer itself. Unlike the other perils, whose dangers are more direct, Qiongqi's greatest weapon is psychological manipulation. It is a master of gaslighting on a cosmic scale. By creating a reality where wickedness is visibly rewarded and goodness is brutally punished, it warps the populace's perception of what is true and valuable. People begin to mimic the behavior that seems to bring success, leading to a downward spiral where cynicism and self-interest replace compassion and community. The myth serves as a stark warning about the fragility of social virtue. It suggests that morality is not a default human setting, but a delicate cultural achievement that must be constantly protected from malevolent forces that seek to prove it is foolish, and that the world truly belongs to the selfish and the cruel. To truly grasp the malice of Qiongqi, we must turn to the stories that showcase its particular brand of cruelty. One of the most revealing tales paints a picture of its actions not as grand, world-altering events, but as intimate, personal betrayals. The ancient texts describe Qiongqi lurking on the peripheries of human settlements, its keen senses attuned not to physical prey, but to the subtle undercurrents of discord. It was a connoisseur of conflict, seeking out long-standing friendships and unbreakable bonds, not to admire them, but to shatter them for its own perverse amusement. Imagine two lifelong friends, their trust forged over decades of shared hardship. A simple misunderstanding arises, perhaps a missing tool or an unreturned favor, the kind of minor friction that a healthy relationship can easily withstand. But Qiongqi would descend upon this tiny crack like a poison. Using its ability to mimic voices and sow confusion, it would plant evidence, whisper false accusations in the ear of one friend against the other, and carefully stage scenes of betrayal. It didn't just tell lies, it engineered circumstances to make those lies seem irrefutably true. The goal was never to simply cause an argument, but to orchestrate a complete and irreversible schism, to turn devotion into bitter hatred. The creature would then linger, invisible, to watch the fruit of its labor. The eruption of fury, the tears of heartbreak, the dissolution of a bond it deemed too virtuous to exist. This was its true sustenance, not the flesh of the good, but the very moment their goodness was extinguished by paranoia and rage. This manipulation extended beyond personal relationships into the very fabric of law and order. Another legend tells of a humble, honest farmer who found a purse of gold coins lost by a traveling merchant. Despite his own poverty, the farmer journeyed for days to return the purse to its rightful owner. As the grateful merchant was rewarding the farmer's integrity, Qiongqi intervened. It might use its powers to swap the reward for a worthless bag of stones at the last second, making the farmer appear a greedy fraud in the merchant's eyes. Simultaneously, it would seek out a known thief in a nearby town, lead him to a hidden cache of stolen goods, and then ensure he was publicly praised for discovering it, framing his luck as a stroke of heroic fortune. In a single, coordinated act, Qiongqi would publicly humiliate virtue and lavishly reward vice, delivering a devastating blow to the community's faith in justice. This systematic inversion of morality is what makes Qiongqi the most psychologically complex of the perils. It wasn't a force of nature like Hundun or a blunt instrument like Taowu. It was a strategist of chaos, a poisoner of wells. Its actions were designed to teach a terrifying lesson, that honesty is for fools, that treachery is the surest path to success, and that no good deed will ever go unpunished. By making this lesson seem like a law of the universe, it sought to reprogram the very social contract that holds a civilization together. If people could no longer trust their neighbors, their leaders, or the outcomes of their own actions, society would atomize into a collection of suspicious, self-interested individuals, easy prey for any larger threat. Qiongqi's greatest victory would not be a pile of bones, but a community that had willingly adopted its twisted, cynical worldview, becoming a mirror of the monster itself. The profound danger that Qiongqi represents transcends its mythological role as a simple monster. It embodies one of the most sophisticated threats to any civilization, the complete inversion and subsequent corruption of its foundational moral framework. This creature is not merely an enemy of people, but an enemy of the very concepts of goodness and justice. Its actions systematically dismantle the belief that virtue is rewarded and vice is punished, which is the psychological bedrock of social trust and legal order. In essence, Qiongqi is the mythological personification of a world descending into absolute moral relativism, where there is no objective good or evil, only what is momentarily advantageous for the selfish individual. It doesn't just create lawlessness, it engineers a society where wickedness is celebrated as cleverness and integrity is mocked as naivete. This mythological nightmare directly mirrors the deepest fears articulated in Confucian philosophy, which placed the maintenance of proper social relationships, known as the five bonds, at the absolute center of a harmonious society. These bonds between ruler and subject, father and son, husband and wife, elder and younger sibling, and friend, were not merely social etiquette, they were the very architecture of a functional universe. Each relationship was governed by a principle of reciprocal duty and respect. The ruler was to be benevolent and the subject loyal. The father was to be loving and the son filial. This intricate web of mutual obligation was what prevented society from collapsing into a chaotic free-for-all. Qiongqi's entire existence is a violent assault on this system. By devouring the loyal subject and rewarding the treacherous one, it shatters the bond between ruler and subject. By turning friends into bitter enemies, it obliterates the bond of trust between companions. Its goal is to prove that these Confucian ideals are not just fragile, but ultimately foolish, creating a world where the only rational choice is to look out for oneself. The catastrophic consequence of this corruption is the erosion of Lai and Ren, two pillars of Confucian thought. Lai encompasses ritual, propriety, and the entire set of behaviors that glue society together. It's the practice of acting in a way that shows respect for your role within these social bonds. Ren is the inner virtue of humaneness, benevolence, and empathy that gives Lai its heartfelt meaning. A person with Ren acts with propriety not because they fear punishment, but because they genuinely care for the well-being of others. Qiongqi's manipulations make a mockery of both. When the virtuous are punished, it signals that practicing Lai is a pointless performance. When the wicked are rewarded, it proves that cultivating Ren is a strategic weakness. This creates a cynical, self-interested populace that goes through the motions of social ritual without any of the underlying goodwill, hollowing out the culture from the inside until it becomes a brittle shell, ready to shatter at the slightest pressure. We can see the terrifying shadow of Qiongqi's influence not just in myth, but in a pivotal concept from Chinese historical philosophy, the idea of the mandate of heaven. This mandate was the divine justification for a ruler's authority, but it was not unconditional. It could be withdrawn if the ruler failed in his duties, a failure often signaled by natural disasters, rebellions, and widespread corruption. A key sign that the mandate was slipping away was the prevalence of exactly the kind of moral decay that Qiongqi engineers, corrupt officials being promoted, honest advisors being executed or sidelined, and a court filled with flatterers instead of truth-tellers. In this light, Qiongqi is more than a monster. It is a symptom of a dynasty losing its heavenly right to rule. Its presence in the mythological landscape serves as an eternal warning to those in power. A kingdom where the wicked prosper and the good suffer is not just an unhappy kingdom. It is a kingdom that has fundamentally lost its way and is teetering on the brink of cosmic collapse. This ancient symbol finds startlingly relevant echoes in our modern world. Qiongqi thrives in environments where misinformation spreads faster than truth, where outrage is monetized, and where bad faith arguments are given equal platform with evidenced fact. It is the force that promotes a charismatic demagogue who sows division over a dull but competent administrator who fosters unity. It is the social media algorithm that rewards the most inflammatory lie with viral attention, while a nuanced, truthful post languishes in obscurity. The creature's ancient strategy of publicly humiliating virtue and rewarding vice is played out daily in headlines where acts of integrity are debunked or spun as hidden greed, while acts of blatant corruption are framed as savvy disruption of a broken system. The myth forces us to ask a difficult question. In our own society, are we, through our attention and our actions, inadvertently playing the role of Qiongqi? Are we devouring the good and rewarding the wicked with our clicks, our shares, and our votes? Ultimately, the legend of Qiongqi is a profound testament to the ancient Chinese understanding that morality is not a passive state but an active, continuous achievement. A just society does not emerge automatically. It must be consciously built and fiercely protected every single day against the innate human tendencies toward selfishness, jealousy, and tribalism that Qiongqi so expertly exploits. The monster represents the ever-present temptation to believe that principles are for suckers and that the game is rigged, so one might as well play for themselves. Defeating Qiongqi, therefore, is not the job of a single hero with a sword. It is the civic duty of every individual who chooses to trust when it is difficult, to be honest when it is costly, and to reward integrity in others whenever they see it. It is a daily, collective rejection of the cynical whisper that says goodness doesn't pay, and an affirmation that the true wealth of a civilization lies not in its power or riches, but in the unbreakable strength of its people's character. Looking at each of these perils individually reveals a gallery of terrifying monsters, but their true power emerges when we see them not as isolated threats, but as a coordinated system of corruption. They form a kind of mythological pantheon of dysfunction, with each entity targeting a specific pillar that supports cosmic and social harmony. Hundun attacks the very concept of structure itself. Taowu dismantles the pursuit of wisdom. Taotie perverts the sustenance of the community, and Qiongqi inverts the moral framework that governs relationships. They are a four-pronged assault on existence, and understanding their interplay is key to grasping the profound depth of this ancient worldview. This systematic approach reflects a sophisticated understanding of how societies actually collapse. It's rarely one single cause. A civilization doesn't fall merely because of economic greed or political corruption or social ignorance. It's the synergistic effect of all these failures feeding into and amplifying each other. The Four Perils model this perfectly. Imagine a realm where Qiongqi's influence has taken hold, where flatterers are rewarded and honest officials are devoured. This creates a leadership vacuum filled by the kind of willful ignorance embodied by Taowu. Those in power, no longer receiving good counsel, make foolish decisions that destabilize the state and economy. This scarcity and instability then foster the environment in which Taotie's gluttony thrives, as the powerful hoard resources out of a desperate, insatiable fear of lack. And this rampant, selfish consumption, this breakdown of fair distribution, ultimately leads back to the formless chaos of Hundun, a complete societal collapse where all order, trust, and structure dissolve into a desperate struggle for survival. Each peril paves the way for the next, creating a vicious, self-reinforcing cycle of decline. Their system also maps perfectly onto the Confucian Daoist framework of the well-ordered self and the well-ordered state. In this philosophy, an individual achieves harmony through the cultivation of knowledge, the practice of moderation, the adherence to moral ritual, and the maintenance of sincere relationships. The Four Perils represent the catastrophic failure of each of these domains. Taowu is the failure to cultivate knowledge, becoming stubborn and unteachable. Taotie is the failure of moderation, surrendering to bottomless appetite. Qiongqi is the failure of moral ritual, perverting the rules of conduct for personal gain. And Hundun is the ultimate failure, the complete loss of selfhood and structure, a return to a primordial state of undifferentiated confusion. On a societal level, the same pattern applies. A state plagued by these forces has abandoned learning, embraced excess, corrupted its justice, and is teetering on the brink of total dissolution. This holistic system also offers a more nuanced solution than simply slaying a monster. Because the perils are interconnected, combating them requires an equally comprehensive approach. You cannot defeat Taotie's greed without also promoting the wisdom and discernment that Taowu rejects. You cannot uphold the moral order that Qiongqi inverts without first establishing the clear structures and definitions that Hundun threatens to erase. The legendary victories of sage kings were never just about physical prowess. They were about embodying the entire set of virtues that counter this fourfold corruption. They were wise, moderate, just, and orderly. Their triumph was the triumph of a complete system of harmony over a complete system of chaos. The myth, therefore, is not a call to find a magical sword, but a call to cultivate a virtuous character and a just society, building a fortress of collective integrity that is resilient to all forms of corrosive influence. It is a reminder that the balance of the universe is maintained not by a single heroic act, but by the daily, conscious practice of goodness in all its forms. This remarkable transformation of mythological archetypes into political tools reveals just how deeply embedded the Four Perils were in the machinery of statecraft. An emperor facing rebellion in a distant province or corruption within his own court didn't just see a logistical problem. He saw a cosmic imbalance manifesting through human actors. By publicly identifying a troublesome general or a disloyal minister as a literal embodiment of, say, Taowu's willful ignorance or Qiongqi's treacherous inversion, the throne was doing far more than name-calling. It was engaging in a profound act of mythological branding that legitimized extreme action. To declare someone a peril was to remove their humanity and place them outside the protection of both law and morality, framing their removal not as a political purge but as a sacred duty to restore cosmic order. This was propaganda woven from the very fabric of ancient belief, granting the emperor the ultimate authority, that of a sage king acting on behalf of heaven itself to subdue chaos. We see this strategy employed with brilliant clarity by some of China's most foundational rulers. The legendary Yellow Emperor Qiongqi, who according to myth defeated Taowu, established the primordial template. Later emperors, especially those founding new dynasties, would consciously mimic this archetype by portraying their predecessors as gluttonous Taoties who had consumed the nation's wealth, or as Qiongqi-like figures who had filled their courts with flatterers and punished the virtuous. A rebel leader could justify his insurrection as a righteous act of cosmic rebalancing. He wasn't seizing power, he was answering heaven's withdrawn mandate by vanquishing the perils that had led to its withdrawal. The new dynasty's origin story thus became a reenactment of mythological victory, legitimizing their rule through a narrative that resonated deeply with the cultural understanding of how order is forged from chaos. The language used in imperial edicts and official histories is dripping with these metaphors. A minister who hoarded grain during a famine might be memorialized not as corrupt but as having a Taotie heart, his physical form merely housing the ancient spirit of gluttony. A rival prince who refused to accept the emperor's authority was not simply ambitious, he was stubborn as Taowu, his mind closed to the harmonious will of heaven. This rhetorical move was incredibly effective. It transformed complex political conflicts into stark, mythological battles of good versus evil that even the commonest farmer could understand. The populace might not grasp the intricacies of court intrigue or tax policy, but they knew the stories of the perils. They understood that a Taotie in the ministry meant starvation, and a Qiongqi in the emperor's ear meant injustice. Framing a crackdown in these terms could often guarantee public support, as people rallied to the side of order against the specter of primordial chaos. This system also created a powerful, self-reinforcing cycle of control. The very act of labeling and removing a peril served to strengthen the emperor's claim to be the guardian of harmony. Each successful campaign against a supposed manifestation of these evils was held up as further proof that the ruler possessed the virtue and wisdom to identify and subdue cosmic corruption, thereby reinforcing the legitimacy of the mandate of heaven. It was a perfect loop. The existence of a threat proved the necessity of the emperor's power, and his victory over that threat proved his rightful possession of that power. The mythology provided a timeless script for legitimizing authority and demonizing opposition, a script that was used for centuries to consolidate control and manage dissent under the grand, unifying banner of maintaining cosmic balance. These confrontations were never simple monster-slaying tales. They were foundational myths, grand narratives where the very fate of civilization hung in the balance. The heroes who rose to meet these threats were not adventurers seeking glory, but paragons of order themselves, their personal virtues acting as the precise antidote to the specific chaos each peril represented. The Yellow Emperor Qiongqi stands as the quintessential example. Revered as the mythic founder of Chinese civilization, he was credited with bestowing upon humanity the arts of writing, medicine, and statecraft. He didn't just build a kingdom, he constructed the very idea of an ordered society. It is utterly fitting, then, that his most celebrated victories were against the forces that sought to dismantle that order before it could even be established. His legendary campaign against the warlike Taowu was not just a military conquest, but a necessary act of carving out a space for civilization from the surrounding wilderness and chaos. While explicit myths of him battling, say, Taowu are less detailed, the archetype is clear. A being of supreme wisdom and strategic thought would naturally be the one to outmaneuver and subdue the embodiment of stubborn, belligerent ignorance, using cunning and knowledge to trap the beast where brute force alone would have failed. His triumphs were cosmic affirmations that a society built on knowledge and virtue could indeed withstand the mindless fury of the untaught and the unreachable. If the Yellow Emperor represented the imposition of initial order, then Yu the Great embodied the heroic, unending labor required to maintain it against nature's relentless chaos. His saga is one of the most potent in all Chinese mythology. Faced with a world drowning in a catastrophic flood, a literal manifestation of Hundun's formless, watery chaos, Yu did not fight with a sword. His weapons were a shovel, his measuring tools, and his own indefatigable will. For 13 years, he labored to dredge rivers and channel the floodwaters to the sea, forging the mountains and valleys of China itself in the process. He passed his own home 3 times in those years, hearing the cries of his infant son, yet never once stopping his work, for the salvation of the entire world depended on his focus. Yu's victory was over the chaos of the untamed world, a direct parallel to the struggle against the Peril Hundun. He did not destroy the primordial waters, that was impossible. Instead, he imposed structure upon them, carving out the 9 provinces of China and defining its geography, thus creating a habitable, ordered world from the raging, undifferentiated soup of the deluge. His story is the ultimate allegory for the human project. Civilization is not a given, but a backbreaking, generations-long effort to hold the line against the entropy that constantly threatens to swallow us all. Other mythic figures took up this eternal struggle, each confrontation highlighting a different facet of the battle. The fierce archer Hu Yi, most famous for shooting down 9 of the 10 suns that were scorching the earth, also battled monstrous manifestations of chaos. While not always directly named as one of the 4 perils, the creatures he defeated, like the gargantuan river serpent and the giant boar, were undoubtedly of the same chaotic essence. His actions protected the fledgling human communities from being wiped out by environmental catastrophes, ensuring their survival long enough to build a culture. Similarly, the tales of the Yellow Emperor's daughter, Nuba, who fought a devastating drought demon, showcase that the defense of order was a continuous, multi-generational effort requiring all forms of heroism. These stories collectively argue that the rise of humanity was not a peaceful, inevitable ascent. It was a precarious victory, 1 inch by inch against a cosmos inherently tilted toward disorder, safeguarded by figures who embodied the discipline, self-sacrifice, and ingenuity required to keep the darkness at bay. The methods of these victories are as instructive as the victories themselves. They were rarely about annihilation. The goal was not to erase chaos, an impossible task, but to subdue it, to bind it, to force it into a form that could be managed. The Yellow Emperor used strategy and clever traps. Yu used engineering and relentless labor. This reflects a profound philosophical understanding. Chaos cannot be destroyed, only contained and redirected. The perils were often driven off to the distant corners of the earth, the remote western mountains, the frozen northern wastes, symbolically pushing the threat of disorder to the very frontiers of the known world. This act of geographical exile served as a constant, sobering reminder. Order exists only in the well-tended center. Just beyond the borders, the primordial chaos still swirls, waiting for any lapse in vigilance to come flooding back in. The myths tell us that harmony is not a permanent state of peace, but a fragile, actively maintained equilibrium, and the duty of every leader and every generation is to take up the tools of their mythic ancestors and continue the work. This journey from external myth to internal map represents one of the most fascinating evolutions in Chinese thought, as the terrifying perils of the outer world were gradually internalized within Daoist alchemical practices. They were no longer just monsters to be defeated by kings. They became the most intimate of adversaries, the psychological and spiritual obstacles residing within the seeker's own heart and mind. the very barriers to achieving immortality and enlightenment. The external battle for cosmic order became an internal one for self-mastery, where the ultimate wilderness to be tamed was the practitioner's own inner landscape. This profound shift reframed the quest for harmony, turning it inward and making every individual a microcosm of the universe, responsible for subduing their own personal manifestations of primordial chaos. In the intricate system of Daoist alchemy, the goal was the refinement of the self into a perfected being, an immortal who had achieved unity with the Tao. This process, known as Nidun or internal alchemy, involved transforming the base substances of one's being, body, energy, and spirit into a golden, indestructible elixir of life. But just as an alchemist must purify raw, chaotic ore to extract precious metal, the practitioner had to confront and transmute the raw, chaotic elements of their own nature. The Four Perils provided a perfect symbolic language for these internal corruptions. They were the demons or thieves that stole vital energy, disrupted meditation, and anchored the aspirant to the mortal world of suffering and desire. Recognizing and overcoming them was not optional, it was the very essence of the spiritual work. Each peril thus became a masterclass in a specific type of spiritual failure. Hundun, the formless, was internalized as the state of mental fog and confusion that obstructs clear meditation. The aspiring alchemist sitting in stillness might find their mind not achieving serene emptiness, but instead dissolving into a swirling, undifferentiated mess of half-formed thoughts, drowsiness, and mental murk, a direct experience of inner Hundun. This wasn't a blank slate, but a chaotic soup where intention and focus could not coalesce. The practitioner's task was not to drill holes into this state with forced concentration, but to gently guide the awareness toward a serene, luminous clarity, allowing a natural order to emerge from the mental chaos without violent intervention. Taowu, the stubbornly ignorant, manifested within as the arrogant, closed-minded belief that one already knows everything, a mindset that utterly prevents the humility and openness required for true learning from a master or from the Tao itself. This inner Taowu is the voice that dismisses subtle teachings as nonsense, that refuses to engage with difficult practices, and that lashes out with defensive pride when confronted with a deeper truth that challenges one's preconceived identity. In alchemical terms, this is the ultimate blockage, a calcification of the spirit that makes the flow of transformative energy impossible. The defeat of inner Taowu required the cultivation of the beginner's mind, a conscious shedding of certainty and a heartfelt willingness to be taught, even if the lessons upended one's entire worldview. The internal Taotie was perhaps the most immediately recognizable adversary, the gluttony of the spirit. This wasn't merely a craving for food, but an insatiable hunger for sensory experience, for emotional drama, for worldly validation, and for spiritual experiences themselves. The meditator plagued by inner Taotie might sit down to cultivate stillness, but instead find themselves mentally devouring plans for the future, rehearsing past conversations, or hungrily seeking visions and special sensations to fuel their sense of spiritual accomplishment. This craving consumes the Kai, the vital energy, diverting it from its alchemical purpose and exhausting the spirit. The practice to overcome it was the cultivation of moderation and contentment, Zhai Zhu, learning to find profound nourishment in simplicity and to see the pursuit of constant sensory and mental consumption as the act of self-cannibalization that it truly is. Finally, the most insidious of all, the inner Qiongqi. This was the master of self-deception, the psychological mechanism that actively tricks the self. It is the internal voice that praises our vices and punishes our virtues. It's the part of us that rationalizes laziness as self-care, that frames selfishness as smart business, and that dismisses an act of compassion as naive. Most dangerously, it perverts the spiritual path itself, encouraging the seeker to pursue practices for the wrong reasons, to gain power over others, to achieve a sense of superiority, or to collect spiritual accolades. This inner Qiongqi creates a hall of mirrors where every effort toward enlightenment is subtly twisted back into an act of ego. Defeating it requires ruthless self-honesty and the constant, vigilant practice of discernment, constantly asking, is this action truly aligning me with the Tao, or is it just flattering my own self-image? The alchemical techniques for confronting these inner perils were sophisticated meditative and introspective practices. A common method was guarding the one, an intense focus on a single point to burn away the mental chaos of Hundun. Another was circulating the light, a practice of internal observation where the adept would mentally scan their own body and spirit, not with judgment, but with a calm, illuminating awareness, seeking out the dark corners where a peril like Taotie's greed or Qiongqi's deceit might be hiding. The moment of recognition was itself a form of exorcism, to see the hunger, the stubbornness, or the deception clearly and name it for what it was robbed it of its power. The energy that was once bound up in that negative pattern was then freed to be refined in the alchemical process. This internal war was considered far more difficult and noble than any external battle. A king could dispatch an army to chase a monster to the border, but an alchemist had to sit in silent solitude with their own deepest flaws, facing them without flinching and transmuting them through unwavering awareness and virtue. The ultimate victory was not the destruction of these inner forces. That would be like trying to destroy a part of oneself, but their transformation, the relentless hunger of Taotie when purified, could become the unwavering zeal for the Tao. The fierce strength of Taowu, when redirected, could become the resoluteness to persevere in practice. The transformative power of inner alchemy lay in this recycling of energy, turning the very substance of one's failings into the fuel for one's ascent. For centuries, the Four Perils existed primarily within the pages of ancient texts, their forms conjured by words and philosophical allegory. But what if we could actually see them? The remarkable truth is that we can, thanks to a wealth of archaeological discoveries that have pulled these mythological beings from the realm of pure thought and into the tangible world of art and ritual. The most stunning and direct evidence comes from the very heart of Chinese antiquity, the magnificent bronze vessels of the Shang and Zhou dynasties. Unearthed from royal tombs and ancient ceremonial pits, these artifacts are not silent relics. They are a chorus of voices from the past, and they speak overwhelmingly of the Taotie. Gazing upon one of these bronzes is to come face to face with the glutton itself. The motif is unmistakable, a symmetrical, often fragmented face dominated by glaring, protruding eyes, a broad nose, and a gaping maw that seems to consume the very surface of the metal. Craftsmen used a sophisticated casting technique to create these designs, their artistry giving form to a profound cultural fear. The Taotie isn't just a decoration. It is the central thematic element, a guardian and a warning fused into the sacred bronze. Finding these vessels in tombs tells us they were considered essential for the afterlife, suggesting that the elite believed the struggle against such corrupting forces continued even after death, and that they needed these symbolic protections in the world to come. Moving forward in time, the Han Dynasty offers a different but equally fascinating window into the evolving mythology through the intricate carvings adorning tomb walls and the surfaces of rare, luxurious objects. In this era, the focus of art often shifted toward the pursuit of immortality and a prosperous afterlife, and the perils appear as part of this broader cosmic landscape. While the Taotie remains recognizable, its form sometimes softens or becomes intertwined with other mythological creatures like the Bixi beast. More importantly, Han art begins to provide context. We don't just see the monsters, we see narratives. Tomb carvings might depict scenes of hunters confronting strange beasts in mountainous landscapes, which scholars interpret as possible allegories for the human struggle against chaotic forces. On exquisite lacquerware and bronze mirrors, the perils are often shown alongside celestial beings and auspicious animals, neatly placed within a structured cosmos. This positioning is critical. It shows that by the Han period, these creatures were not just feared, they were being systematically catalogued and understood. They were assigned their place in the universal order, often shown being subdued or contained by stronger, benevolent forces, reinforcing the idea that while chaos exists, it can be managed within a properly ordered universe. Beyond art, the textual evidence from excavated manuscripts provides a revolutionary, ground-level view of how these myths were lived and understood. The discovery of bamboo slip texts such as those from the Guodian tomb has been like finding a library sealed for over 2,000 years. These manuscripts contain versions of well-known philosophical works like the classic of Mountains and Seas, but often with fascinating variations in the descriptions of the perils. These differences are not mistakes, they are snapshots of a living, evolving tradition. A description of Qiongqi in one region might emphasize its winged tiger form, while a text from another area might focus more on its behavior of rewarding the wicked. This tells us that the myths were not monolithic. They were adapted and refined by different schools of thought and in different communities, each adding their own local flavor and emphasis to the core archetype. Furthermore, these texts frequently list the perils alongside other strange creatures and geographical wonders, treating them almost as a natural part of the world's inventory. This blending of the mythological with the supposedly factual reveals an ancient world where the boundary between the physical and the metaphysical was far more porous than it is today. The geographical spread of these artifacts paints a picture of a mythology that was both unifying and diverse. A bronze Jew wine vessel with a classic Taotie motif found in a Shang tomb in Anyang carries the same core symbolic message as a similar vessel found hundreds of miles away. This consistency across a vast empire indicates that the fear of gluttony and the need for ritual warning were central tenets of elite culture, a shared symbolic language that reinforced a collective identity. However, a tomb carving from the southern state of Chu might depict a peril with slightly different features or in a unique compositional style compared to one from the Central Plains. These regional variations are incredibly valuable. They show how a common mythological framework was adapted to local beliefs and artistic traditions. The core meaning of the creature, its role as an embodiment of a specific type of chaos, remained constant, but its visual representation could be inflected by local folklore and environmental influences, proving that these stories were dynamic, living parts of regional cultures, not just top-down impositions from a central authority. Ultimately, archaeology does more than just prove these stories existed. It allows us to trace the intellectual journey of an entire civilization grappling with complex ideas. The evolution of the Taotie motif alone is a history lesson in miniature. On the early Shang bronzes, the face is ferocious, prominent, and overwhelmingly visceral, a direct and terrifying confrontation with the concept of consumption. As we move into the Zhou dynasty and especially the later Warring States period, the motif can become more stylized, abstract, and sometimes even decorative, its sharp teeth dissolving into intricate swirls. This shift doesn't mean the symbol lost its power. Rather, it suggests a maturation of the concept. The threat of gluttony was no longer a new, shocking fear, but an established, integrated part of the philosophical landscape, its representation refined through centuries of artistic and intellectual repetition. Each excavated object, from a massive bronze cauldron to a single inscribed bamboo slip, is a point on a timeline charting how abstract fears about morality, power, and chaos were processed, given form, and passed down through generations, providing us with an unparalleled record of the ancient Chinese mind at work. And so these ancient beings have not faded into obscurity, confined to dusty scrolls and museum cases. They have instead shape-shifted, finding new life and terrifying relevance in the very heart of modern Chinese culture, seamlessly migrating from bronze ritual vessels to the glowing screens of cinema, television, and video games. This is not a case of simple nostalgia or historical homage. It is a testament to the raw, enduring power of their symbolism. Contemporary storytellers instinctively recognize that the perils represent primal, universal fears about the fragility of our own minds and societies, making them perfect vessels for exploring modern anxieties. They are no longer just monsters from a mythical past. They have become a sophisticated language for critiquing the corruptions of the present, their essential natures reskinned for a new age but their poisonous hearts unchanged. In the realm of cinema and television, these archetypes provide a deep well of inspiration for crafting complex villains whose evil feels both terrifying and philosophically weighty. A corrupt corporate tycoon in a financial thriller, whose insatiable greed leads him to devour smaller companies and lay waste to the livelihoods of thousands, is a direct descendant of the Taotie. His hunger isn't for food, but for market share and personal wealth, and his ultimate fate often mirrors the mythological glutton, his empire collapsing in on itself through the very excess that built it. Similarly, a political drama might feature a powerful minister who surrounds himself with sycophants, exiles truth-tellers, and operates on a platform of blatant misinformation. This character is a clear echo of Qiongqi, the devious manipulator, perverting the systems of justice and reward to create a world where loyalty is punished and treachery is the only path to survival. By drawing on these ancient templates, writers can create antagonists who feel archetypally menacing, their actions resonating with a deeper cultural understanding of evil as a force of imbalance rather than mustache-twirling malice. The world of video games, particularly those developed within China, has proven to be an incredibly fertile ground for the Four Perils, as they offer a perfect blend of compelling boss fight mechanics and rich narrative depth. A player might journey through a fantastical landscape only to encounter a towering, bestial boss that charges mindlessly at them, incapable of strategy or learning from its mistakes, forcing the player to use clever environmental puzzles and traps to defeat it. This creature is Taowu incarnate, its design often incorporating elements of boars and tigers, its gameplay mechanics embodying the frustration of confronting stubborn, unthinking aggression. In another game, a final boss might not be a physical threat at all, but a psychological one, a manipulative entity that turns the player's own party members against them, corrupts the healing systems of the game, and rewards the player for making selfish choices. This is a brilliant interactive translation of Qiongqi's core menace, making the player experience the visceral horror of an inverted moral universe firsthand. Perhaps the most fascinating modern reinterpretations come from the Qiongqi genre, a wildly popular form of fantasy literature and television that revolves around cultivators seeking immortality through Daoist and Buddhist practices. Here, the internal alchemical concept of the perils becomes a central narrative device. The protagonist's journey to power is not just about gathering strength, but about confronting their own inner demons. A pivotal story arc might involve the hero entering a meditative trance or a mystical realm where they must physically face a manifestation of their own arrogance and refusal to learn, a personal Taowu that threatens to halt their cultivation progress. In another scenario, a character might be tempted by a technique that offers rapid power at the terrible cost of consuming their own spiritual energy or the life force of others, a clear metaphor for the Taotie's self-cannibalizing hunger. These stories externalize the internal struggle of self-mastery, making the ancient Daoist warning breathtakingly literal and visually spectacular for a modern audience. This enduring presence confirms a profound truth about these mythological beings. They are far more than just monsters. They are a fundamental part of the cultural toolkit, a set of symbolic keys that unlock deeper conversations about the challenges of modern life. When a social media influencer is described as having a Taotie-like appetite for viral clout and attention, sacrificing authenticity for consumption, the term carries a weight that modern words like influencer or content creator simply lack. It connects a contemporary phenomenon to an ancient pattern of behavior, framing it not as a new trend but as a very old human failing in a digital disguise. Similarly, a government crackdown on corruption might be framed in official media not just as a legal action, but as a continued effort to subdue the perils that threaten social harmony, consciously linking modern policy to the eternal mission of the mythic sage kings. The fact that these four specific creatures continue to be singled out, while other mythical beasts fade into the background, speaks to the uncanny precision with which they diagnose enduring human problems. They are not general-purpose monsters, they are specialists in corruption. In a world increasingly anxious about misinformation, Qiongqi's philosophy feels chillingly relevant. In an era of unsustainable consumption and climate change, the image of the Taotie eating itself to death is a devastatingly potent allegory. In a time of polarized discourse and entrenched ideologies, the unteachable, charging Taowu feels like it is haunting our comment sections and legislative halls. And in the overwhelming, algorithmically driven chaos of the digital age, the formless, sensory overload of Hundun can feel like an accurate description of our daily online experience. They have endured because the imbalances they represent have only become more acute, their ancient warnings now echoing through our hyper-connected, often disorienting modern world. But what if these ancient stories are more than just myths about external monsters? What if the true battleground was never a distant mountain or a primordial void, but the intricate and often hidden landscape of the human psyche? When we view the Four Perils through a modern psychological lens, they transform from external threats into powerful symbols of our own internal struggles, representing the shadow aspects and fundamental weaknesses that every individual must confront. This interpretation doesn't diminish their power, it amplifies it, turning these mythological beings into a timeless map of the human condition, charting the treacherous terrain of our own inner chaos. Consider Hundun, the formless chaos. Psychologically, this isn't just a cosmic state, it's a mental one. It represents the anxiety and confusion that arise when our internal world lacks structure, when we feel untethered, without a clear sense of identity, purpose, or direction. This is the fog of depression where everything feels muted and undifferentiated, the overwhelming panic attack where thoughts and sensations swirl into an incomprehensible storm, or the simple existential dread of not knowing who we are or where we belong. In a world that constantly demands we define ourselves, Hundun symbolizes the terrifying but potent potential of the unformed self, the parts of our psyche we haven't yet explored or understood. The ancient warning becomes a modern therapeutic insight. We cannot simply drill holes of rigid order into this internal chaos through force of will. Like the emperors who killed Hundun, doing so can destroy our potential for growth. Instead, we must learn to sit with the uncertainty, to allow a coherent sense of self to emerge organically from the confusion, practicing mindfulness rather than applying brute force control. Then there is Taowu, the embodiment of stubborn ignorance. From a psychological standpoint, this peril is the personification of cognitive rigidity and confirmation bias. It's not a simple lack of knowledge, but an active, defensive refusal to incorporate new information that challenges our pre-existing beliefs and identity. We see this in the internal voice that dismisses constructive criticism out of hand, that rationalizes harmful behaviors, or that clings to an outdated self-image long after it has ceased to be true. This inner Taowu protects a fragile ego by building walls around it, attacking any new idea that feels threatening. It's the part of us that would rather be right than be happy, that chooses the comfort of a familiar prison over the uncertainty of freedom. Defeating this internal beast requires the psychological virtues of humility, openness, and intellectual curiosity, the willingness to be wrong, to feel the discomfort of cognitive dissonance, and to continuously update our understanding of ourselves and the world. It is the hard work of therapy and self-reflection, of challenging our own automatic thoughts and dismantling the defenses that keep us stuck. The Taotie's gluttony translates with chilling accuracy into the psychology of addiction and compulsive consumption. This isn't merely about overeating, it's about any pattern of behavior where the pursuit of a desire for money, for validation, for pleasure, for power, becomes disconnected from any real need and takes on a self-perpetuating life of its own. The inner Taotie is the insatiable hunger that fuels workaholism, where success never feels like enough. It's the algorithm of social media that trains us to constantly crave more likes, more followers, more external validation, a hunger that can never truly be filled. This psychological state is characterized by a lack of satiation. Each accomplishment or acquisition only briefly satisfies before the hunger returns, stronger than before. The myth of the Taotie eating its own body is a perfect metaphor for how these compulsions ultimately consume the self. The workaholic sacrifices their health and relationships on the altar of achievement. The people-pleaser erodes their own boundaries and authenticity in the quest for approval. The message is that a life driven by unchecked appetite is ultimately a self-cannibalizing one, where we devour our own time, energy, and spirit in a futile attempt to feed a hunger that is, at its core, spiritual and emotional, not physical. Finally, Qiongqi finds its home in the dark art of self-deception and moral disengagement. This is arguably the most insidious of the inner perils. Psychologically, Qiongqi represents our astonishing capacity to rationalize our own bad behavior, to justify cutting corners, breaking promises, or betraying our own values. It's the internal narrative that reframes selfishness as self-care, that dismisses a hurtful comment as just being honest, or that convinces us that our goals are so important that the means don't matter. This is the mechanism of cognitive dissonance in action. When our actions conflict with our self-image as a good person, Qiongqi swoops in to rearrange the facts, making the action seem acceptable or even praiseworthy. It rewards our inner criminal, the selfish, lazy, or envious impulses we all have, with the gift of a clear conscience. Conversely, it punishes our virtuous impulses, the urge to be generous, to tell the hard truth, to take the high road, by framing them as naive, inefficient, or foolish. Winning the battle against this inner Qiongqi requires the difficult practice of rigorous self-honesty and the courage to sit with the uncomfortable feeling of having done wrong without immediately rushing to justify it. It means actively cultivating integrity, not as a performance for others, but as a private commitment to aligning our actions with our professed values, even when no one is watching. This concept of embodying abstract corruption is far from unique to Chinese mythology. In fact, we find strikingly similar archetypes in traditions across the globe, each culture giving form to its deepest anxieties in a kind of universal psychological language. Perhaps the most immediate parallel that comes to mind is the four horsemen of the apocalypse from the Christian tradition. Like the Perils, they are not merely monsters but personifications of catastrophic forces that unravel civilization: conquest, war, famine, and death. Both groups operate as a coordinated strike team of calamity, yet the difference in their nature is profoundly revealing. The horsemen are eschatological. They represent a divine, prophesied punishment at the end of days, a final reckoning for a sinful humanity. Their chaos is a form of brutal, top-down judgment. The Chinese perils, by contrast, are immanent and ever-present. They are not instruments of a god's wrath. They are manifestations of the natural cosmic imbalance that emerges when human virtue fails. Their threat isn't a one-time event at the end of history, but a constant, simmering possibility within history itself, a chaos that is always ready to bubble up from below if the guardians of order, the sage kings and virtuous leaders, should ever falter. This reflects a core difference in worldview. One sees chaos as a final punishment from an external authority, while the other sees it as a foundational state that must be perpetually kept at bay through internal effort. Venture into the vast and intricate tapestry of Hindu mythology, and we find another compelling counterpart in the Asuras. These powerful beings are often simplistically labeled as demons, but their role is far more nuanced. Like the Perils, Asuras are not inherently evil in the way Western demons might be. They are forces of chaos, disorder, and entropy, locked in an eternal struggle with the Devas, the gods of order and light. They represent the darker aspects of the human mind: ambition, ego, desire, and arrogance. An Asura might gain immense power through penance and discipline, only to use that power to disrupt the cosmic balance, much like how a human ruler, gifted with authority, could become a Taowu if they let arrogance override wisdom. The key distinction lies in the resolution. In many Hindu narratives, the Asura is ultimately defeated by a specific deity, Vishnu, Shiva, or a goddess like Durga, who incarnates to restore balance. The victory is achieved through divine intervention. The Chinese myths, however, often place the onus on the idealized human ruler, the Yellow Emperor, Yu the Great, to be the agent of order. This highlights a more human-centric approach in the Chinese conception. Maintaining harmony is the supreme responsibility of humankind, not just a task for the gods. The ancient Greeks, too, populated their world with creatures that embodied specific terrors, though their approach was often more literal and personal. Think of the Hydra, a monster that grows 2 heads for every one that is cut off, a perfect symbol for a problem that only multiplies when attacked with brute force, requiring a more strategic solution, much like defeating Taowu, who demanded cunning over simple strength. Or consider the Harpies, vicious winged creatures who are tasked with snatching away food from their victims, leaving behind a foul stench, a very direct physical manifestation of the fear of scarcity and contamination, a more visceral version of Taotie's insatiable hunger. The Greek monsters were often challenges for individual heroes like Heracles or Odysseus to overcome on their personal journeys to glory or homecoming. Their defeats were epic feats that cemented a hero's legend. The subjugation of the Four Perils, however, is almost never about personal glory. It is a communal, cosmological act. The victory of a Chinese cultural hero doesn't just make them famous, it makes the world habitable for everyone. It is an act of creation and civilization building, less about proving individual might and more about fulfilling a collective, moral duty to establish and protect a space for human society to flourish. Even in the mythology of ancient Mesopotamia, we see this pattern. The great epic of Gilgamesh features the monster Humbaba, the guardian of the cedar forest slain by the hero. Humbaba is not evil, he is a force of nature, an appointed guardian whose death represents humanity's conquest of the wild, the clearing of chaos to make room for order. This shares a clear kinship with Yu the Great's taming of the floodwaters, yet Humbaba is a singular entity, an obstacle on one hero's path. The Four Perils represent a more systematic and classified analysis of chaos. They are a catalogue of corruption, each one pinpointing a specific type of moral and social failure. This reflects the intensely philosophical nature of Chinese civilization, which sought not just to story tell but to categorize, analyze, and understand the very principles of the universe. The Perils are less like monsters and more like case studies in cosmological dysfunction. What truly sets the Four Perils apart, then, is their deeply integrated role within a complete philosophical system. While other cultures have monsters of greed, ignorance, and chaos, the Chinese Perils are uniquely tied to concepts of societal harmony, virtuous leadership, and the balance of yin and yang. They are not just scary stories, they are essential components of a moral and political philosophy. A Greek hero slays the Minotaur to save Athenian youths and prove his courage. A Chinese sage king subdues Taowu to demonstrate that wisdom and strategy must triumph over brute ignorance for a state to survive. One is a legend of heroism, the other is a lesson in statecraft. This is why their legacy has endured so powerfully. They are not frozen in the past as simple relics of superstition, but remain a dynamic symbolic language, a way to critique corruption, warn against arrogance, and understand the delicate, never-finished work of building a just society. They remind us that the monsters we must truly fear are rarely the ones lurking in the shadows of the forest, but the ones we risk nurturing in the shadows of our own hearts and our own halls of power. But the most profound philosophical lesson embedded in these myths is the sobering rejection of any notion that harmony is a permanent, self-sustaining state. The victory over a peril is never final. These creatures are not annihilated, they are subdued, driven to the distant frontiers, contained but never destroyed. They are eternally banished to the remote western mountains or the frozen northern wastes, symbolically pushed to the very edges of the known world. This geographical exile serves as a constant, haunting reminder. Order and civilization exist only in a fragile, well-tended center. Just beyond the borders, the primordial chaos still swirls, waiting for any lapse in vigilance, any decline in virtue, any embrace of arrogance to come flooding back in. The work of maintaining balance is therefore never complete. It is the eternal responsibility of every generation, the endless labor of every individual in a position of influence, from the emperor on his dragon throne to the father at the head of his family. The myths declare that a harmonious society is not a default condition but a precarious achievement, a garden that must be diligently weeded and watered every single day, lest it be choked by the innate wild entropy of the world. This philosophy fosters a unique form of societal responsibility, one that is deeply collective yet intensely personal. The legends of the sage kings are not just stories to be admired, they are models to be emulated. The duty to combat the manifestations of the perils falls not to a specialized class of heroes or priests, but to everyone, each in their own sphere of influence. A government official battles Qiongqi's inversion of justice by promoting the honest and dismissing the corrupt. A teacher fights Taowu's ignorance by cultivating curiosity and critical thought in their students. A community leader counters Taotie's gluttony by ensuring resources are shared fairly and moderation is practiced, and every individual, through daily self-cultivation and mindfulness, works to keep the internal Hundun of their own confusion at bay. This creates a powerful cultural ethos where morality is not a passive state of being good, but an active, continuous practice of doing good, a conscious, effortful application of virtue that is everyone's job. The stability of the entire cosmos, in this view, depends on the accumulated moral effort of its inhabitants. Ultimately, the Four Perils offer a timeless and deeply compassionate insight into the nature of human failing. They are not depicted as utterly alien, external evils, but as corruptions of energies that are, in their proper measure, natural and even necessary. Taotie's hunger is a distortion of the healthy human need for nourishment and security. Taowu's stubbornness is a perversion of the valuable trait of determination. Qiongqi's cunning is a malignant twist on the intelligence required for strategy and discernment. Even Hundun's formlessness contains the seed of all creative potential. The philosophical goal, then, is not the eradication of desire, strength, or cleverness, but their careful cultivation and refinement. Virtue is found in the middle path, the balanced expression of these traits, while the perils represent what happens when any single aspect is allowed to grow monstrously out of proportion, severed from its complementary opposite and from the wisdom that should guide it. The myths teach that we must not kill our demons, but rather understand them, integrate them, and redirect their energy, transforming blind hunger into grateful appreciation, brute stubbornness into unwavering integrity, and selfish cunning into discerning wisdom. And so we arrive at the heart of the matter, the profound and enduring truth these ancient beings have been trying to teach us for millennia. The Four Perils are far more than a simple bestiary of mythological monsters. They are a sophisticated philosophical framework, a symbolic language for diagnosing the corruptions that threaten any system, be it a cosmos, a kingdom, a community, or a single human soul. Hundun, Taowu, Taotie, and Qiongqi represent a brilliant classification of chaos, each one a masterful articulation of a specific way that order can unravel. They are not random evils but targeted dysfunctions, the terror of the unformed, the violence of the untaught, the self-destruction of the insatiable, and the societal collapse born of inverted morality. Together, they form a complete picture of imbalance, teaching us that harmony is not the absence of challenge, but the continuous, conscious practice of virtues that counter these primordial threats. The stunning relevance of these myths today is a testament to their deep understanding of human nature. We may no longer fear a literal winged tiger devouring the honest, but we live in a world where Qiongqi's methods feel eerily familiar. We see it in the digital ecosystems where outrage and misinformation are algorithmically rewarded with visibility and engagement, while nuance and truth are punished with obscurity. We witness the shadow of Taowu in the stubborn refusal to accept scientific consensus or historical fact, where willful ignorance is framed as righteous defiance. The gluttony of Taotie is reflected in our culture of unsustainable consumption, where the relentless hunger for growth and resources threatens to consume the very planet that sustains us. And the formless anxiety of Hundun permeates our hyper-connected lives, a constant stream of information and sensation that can leave us feeling untethered and unable to find a center of calm and clarity. These are not new monsters, they are the ancient perils having shape-shifted to thrive in the landscape of the 21st century. This is where the true wisdom of these stories offers not just a warning but a potential way forward. The ancient solution was never to find a magic weapon to destroy these forces outright, but to cultivate the corresponding virtues that create resilience against them. To counter the formless confusion of Hundun, we must practice mindfulness and seek clarity, building inner and outer structures that provide stability. Against the belligerent ignorance of Taowu, we must champion education, critical thinking, and the humility to admit what we do not know. To heal the self-cannibalizing hunger of Taotie, we must learn the profound power of enough, practicing moderation and valuing sustainability over endless accumulation. And to defeat the inverted morality of Qiongqi, we must make a conscious daily effort to reward integrity, trustworthiness, and compassion in our personal interactions and our societal systems, creating a world where good deeds are visibly valued. The enduring lesson of the Four Perils is ultimately one of profound responsibility. They tell us that the balance of the world is not maintained by gods or fate, but by the accumulated actions of individuals. Every time we choose curiosity over certainty, moderation over excess, or integrity over convenience, we are performing a small act of cosmic maintenance. We are reinforcing the walls against chaos. These myths invite us to look inward and ask a vital question: which of these perils finds the most fertile ground within me? Is it the part of me that refuses to listen to a challenging idea, the part that always wants more, convinced it will finally bring satisfaction, the part that rationalizes a small betrayal? Or the part that feels lost in the noise? By identifying our own inner manifestations of these ancient patterns, we can begin the real work of self-cultivation. These stories, etched on bronze and whispered for thousands of years, leave us with a final, empowering thought. The battle against chaos is not a grand, singular event from a forgotten age. It is here, it is now, it is the choice we make in our families, our work, and our communities. The sage kings of legend are not coming to save us. Their legacy is the blueprint they left behind. It is now our turn to take up the tools of wisdom, moderation, justice, and clarity. It is our generation's responsibility to read the signs of our time, to name the modern perils we face, and to embody the virtues that will keep them at bay. The work of building and protecting a harmonious world is never finished. It is the eternal, shared project of being human, And these four ancient creatures remind us that the price of order is eternal vigilance starting within ourselves.